The grand chamber of the Galactic Council was shaped like a ring made of light and stone, and it floated above the city of towers and bridges on the capital world. And the air inside the chamber smelled like cold metal and clean water, and the sound inside was never soft because hundreds of delegates spoke in many voices. And they spoke with pride and with laughter and with words that cut like knives. And today, their target was the same old legend that they all liked to attack when they wanted to feel strong, because they were mocking humanity again, and they were doing it without fear. And they were doing it to show the young worlds that the council led everything that mattered. High Speaker Vreth stood at the center, tall and thin and silver, and his cloak fell like a waterfall, and his voice carried into every ear, and he said that the story of humans was a story of a primitive species who tried to climb the wall of the stars and fell down and broke. And he smiled and tapped the dais lightly, and the chamber lights brightened, and 1,000 eyes turned to him and to the screen above him. And old images played of crude rockets and long-dead cities and broken signals from long-ago wars, and the council laughed. And the laugh echoed on the stone and through the light rings overhead. He said they vanished centuries ago. And he said their name was a ghost that traders used to sell fake relics. And he said the new worlds should not fear old myths. And he said strength was with the council now. The council protected and taxed and judged. And he raised his hands, and the law was visible in lines of blue light that moved around the room like slow snakes. When he finished, the applause sounded like rain on glass. On the lower ring, far from the shining center and the proud seats, a young officer from a border fleet stood at a console in the shadows, because she had been allowed to witness one session as a prize for good service, and her name was Lyra. And her uniform still had travel dust on it, and she had bright eyes that did not blink much, and she listened to the laughing and the clapping and the words about ghosts. And she felt the same quiet tension she always felt when the council spoke to Isley about things that were gone. Because things that are gone have a way of returning without asking permission. She was not special by blood or name. Her world was a cold world at the edge where storms lived, and her job was to watch numbers and shape them into pictures. For officers who made decisions, and she loved patterns and patience, she loved the moment when noise became meaning. This love made her stay inside the shadows, even when others walked out to eat and talk, because she liked to listen to the room and to the machines at the same time. The High Speaker lifted his hand for silence again, and he began to move toward a vote, and then the lights trembled, and everyone felt a thin pressure inside the ears, and some thought it was a memory of an earthquake, and others thought the city's upper wind had shifted. But then every screen in the chamber blinked black and then white and then black again, and the light rings overhead pulsed once, as if a heart inside them had beaten for the first time. And every personal link and implant that sat inside every skull in the room stuttered in and out of focus. And the sound that followed was not sound, not at first. Because it was a silent pressure, like a great hand on the room, the chamber began to murmur like a disturbed hive. And the technical aides started to run from station to station. And the High Speaker looked up with anger and then tried to shape it into calm, and he said something about a routine grid test. But his words were thin, and the delegates were tapping their links and frowning. And then there was a sound at last, a soft shape of noise that crawled up from the floor and into the bones, a low note that rose and fell and rose again, and the walls themselves seemed to breathe with it. Lyra felt the hairs on her arms move, and she looked at a small readout by her console, and she saw numbers bleeding across the screen like rain, and the numbers were not random. She knew that. In a second, she knew it in her stomach first and then in her head, because the gaps were repeating and the time between pulses was not clean chaos. It was a ladder. It was a simple ladder. And simple ladders are the kind of tools that someone makes when they want strangers to follow safely. Isolate the channel, said a gray officer next to her, and he was not speaking to her, but she did it anyway because she was fast, and she caged the crawling signal in a thin box of code that they used for training, and the box shook as if something inside it was alive and impatient. And she felt the urge to speak to it, which was foolish. So she did not. Across the chamber, the old scholar Lord Ice Soon, whose face looked like folded paper and whose eyes were wet and wise, whispered to the high speaker that the entire capital grid was receiving a broad spectrum burst from deep space, and that it had touched every system that could listen and many that could not. And he said it had a signature shape, and his voice lost its calm. And he asked the high speaker to hold the vote. The high speaker refused at first and said they would continue. And then the lights dimmed by themselves and the vote icons on the desks died like small insects. And the room was no longer amused, and no one laughed. And a cold mood grew like a slow fog. And in that fog a thought began to form that the chamber had not felt in a long time. Here in this place where pride lived, and lived loudly, a thought that felt like a memory of fear. Lyra kept her hands on the console and made her box wider and wider around the signal. And she split the wave by timing and by count, and she mapped it into a thin line of peaks, and the peaks settled into sets, and the sets counted like this, too. 3, 5, 7, 11, and she felt her mouth open a little because these numbers were old and patient, and they came from a language that the universe loved. A language that says hello without choosing any one world's words. And she felt heat rise inside her, and she looked up to the ring and wanted to shout. But she did not shout. She watched the line and let it grow, and the line did not stop. Noise, said Admiral Kex loudly from the central tier, because he was a blunt creature who liked the sound of defiance, and he said there were storms that could look like speech. And he said pirates use tricks with primes, and he said the council should call it a test and call for strong drink. And his laugh tried to jumpstart the room, but it fell flat. And he looked aside with a small, wounded pride that he hid by pulling hard at his collar. The Scholar Lord lifted his hand in a slow, careful way, and he said that pirates do not shut down a capital with a handshake, and he said storms do not. Count with patience, and he said the last time information this clean arrived from the dark, the maps of 3 empires changed in one night. And he said a thing that no one wanted to hear, that the ladder of prime numbers is a greeting that old stories once tied to a name that the high speaker had just mocked. And at that name the room stirred again, but with a different flavor, less bright, more tense. Lyra's fingers did not stop, and she climbed the ladder with the signal. And she saw that each prime group was not only a count, but also a pulse length. And pulse length made a second pattern, and the second pattern made a third pattern. And the third pattern drew small squares on her screen, and those squares repeated and then rotated like the faces of a cube. And after 3 rotations, the small squares became a circle, and then the circle opened like an eye, and she knew the signal was not just saying hello, it was saying where, and it was saying when. She pulled a sideline and sent it. Without asking for permission, to the local archive that held Folklegend scraps that most officers never used because Folklegend was for old people and for the soft hours between shifts. And the archive woke with a sleepy glow and matched nothing and matched everything. And at last it matched a picture on a page that had no page number. A picture of a city that did not sit on a planet and did not hang from a sun. A city that floated in the dark and wore long bridges like ribbons. A city that old traders drew when they wanted to scare children or sell them tales. A city, they whispered, was built by a species that built cities in strange places because they liked to test the edge of every cliff. And the map under the picture said only 2 words, the void, on the higher ring. The high speaker tried to take control again with a strong voice. He failed because steel inside his words had softened, and he called for calm and said the capital would be stable soon, and he said the grid would return to normal. And this promise did not land on anyone's mind, because while he spoke, every starship in geosynchronous orbit flashed its running lights twice as if someone had tapped a finger on a glass table, and the ship traffic alarms sang 3 notes and fell quiet like they were embarrassed. A field marshal from the frontier, whose skin was dark metal and whose left arm was a machine, asked for a channel to the Navy net, and he asked for very fast permission to move a listening array. And he did not wait for the permission. He was already moving it. And on the far side of the chamber, an aide whispered into a mask and called the engineering cathedral that lived under the city. And everywhere in the capital, people looked up from their work because the sky pulse had touched not only machines but also birds and animals and living things. And the pulse felt familiar to the oldest among them, who had long memories of stories their grandparents whispered in the dark. And no one knew why they felt that. Lyra breathed slowly and watched the numbers become pictures. She could feel in the bones of her wrists the deep beat of the signal. And she saw the text come in a wave after the primes, a text that was not truly text because it was blocks of length and silence. Blocks that made a raster, and the raster made lines, and the lines made a simple shape, a triangle that was also a mountain. And under the triangle, a smaller line like a shore, and then the shape changed and became a square inside a circle inside a square. And the square's corners touched the circle, and Lyra's throat went dry because it was so simple and so full of intention. And she said softly to herself that whoever sent this was talking to people who loved geometry. And people who loved geometry were people who built. She sent a private note to the console of her direct commander, who sat 2 rings above her and had never learned her name. And she wrote in crisp words that the signal was patterned, and that the pattern was a greeting built from prime counts and shape codes, and that a coordinate grid was likely embedded, and that whoever sent it wanted it to be understood by minds that did not share language. And she asked for permission to run the pattern against the deep void charts that the frontier fleets kept for ghost mapping. And while the note climbed the chain like a careful animal, she stood on her toes and watched the main screen in the chamber as it flickered between blank and storm, and then stabilized into a simple distribution map of the capital's sky. All of it bright with the touch of the signal like dew. Her commander's reply came late and sharp and formal. And it said to stop all non-requested analysis and to send all raw data to Central. And it said this was not her task. And it said discipline was a virtue. And Lyra lowered her eyes and thought about virtue and about the difference between order and truth. And then she copied all her work and sent it to Central because she was not a fool. And then she kept a small slice open behind a low wall where no one would notice for a little while. And she ran the set against the ghost charts because her hands would not rest otherwise. On the central ring, the Scholar Lord asked the room to listen to a short clip. And he played back 10 seconds of the signal slowed by a factor of 12. And when they heard it, some delegates felt their eyes sting, and they did not know why. And some felt the wish to stand up. Some felt shame for laughing earlier, because the slowed pulse had a cadence like a march. It had the sense of feet and distance. It had the sense of someone coming nearer with patience, and the high speaker flinched like someone had clapped beside his ear. And he told the Scholar Lord to stop theatrics, and the Scholar Lord bowed because bowing was older than speaking. Here, Admiral Kex called the security grid and demanded a list of ships within range that could generate such a disruption. And the grid answered that no registered ship had that power, and that if any unregistered craft were present, they were hiding under a field that the grid could not peel open. And the Admiral's voice rose, and he demanded they expand the search to the near moons. And the grid said the moons were quiet and listening to. Kex swore in a language that used metal sounds. Lyra's wall flickered, and her private set returned an overlay. And the overlay put a small star over a chart that every navigator knew and did not use because it was blank. A cold stretch with nothing inside it but stale dust and old gravity, and the star marked the edge of the void. And there were no planets there, and no stations, and no suns. And the nearest trade lane bent around it like a river bends around a rock. And her hands began to shake a little because if the coordinate lay in the void, then whoever sent this wanted to be found where no one usually looked. And they wanted it that way on purpose. And she felt a calm that was close to fear because it felt like standing on a cliff and seeing a ship rise out of the fog below. The chamber had grown quiet, not by command, but by the weight of something not seen yet and felt already. And the high speaker said the council would issue a public update before fear could spread. While he spoke the city below, the chamber rolled its storm shutters over. The high bridges, because the weather nets had reported a sudden pressure shift. And a school not far from the river had its lights flicker, and the children made a small, surprised sound that turned into a game. And the young parents did not know why their eyes were wet. The border field marshals listening. Array caught the signal from a second angle now. And the cross-calculation gave a distance, and the distance was deep and clean.
House.
And the field marshal said hoarsely that the source was not moving much, and he used the word anchor, ord, and the word made the room colder, because no pirate anchors. In a dead field where there is nothing to eat and nothing to hide inside, and no storm anchors and no ghost. Lyra's private wall showed the prime ladder one more time, and then it stopped. And when it stopped, another wave came, and this one was not math. It was too short and too warm. And she looked at it, and her heart hit her ribs because it was a voice band. Not a language yet, just a band that carried voices. And inside it was a smear-like breath, and she thought she heard a word, single soft word inside the smear, and she did not know if she made it up. And she did not want to write it down because the word was simple and terrible. And it sounded like, remember, she stood very still. Her world felt very small. And she could hear the old stories from her cold home where her grandmother had liked to sit by the window and talk about the brave ghosts who walked between stars without a light. And her grandmother had said their name once, and her mother had told her not to use that name because names have weight and walls have ears. And now the same weight was in the room and on her shoulders and behind her eyes, and she did not want to be right because being right would make the shape of the future very hard. The high speaker tried to take the floor back with an old tool, a loud order, and he told the aides to cut all external feeds until the cause was known. And the aides obeyed because obedience is a habit, and the chamber screens went dark one by one. But even the darkness did not feel empty now. It felt like a hand hiding a sunrise. And the scholar lord, with a voice that held no triumph, only a quiet sadness, said that they could turn off the screens, but they could not turn off the sky and the control tiers below the chamber, where the air always smelled of hot dust and cold glass. A dozen technicians pushed themselves toward exhaustion, and a dozen more arrived. And they were all clever and proud, and they all knew that something was coming that did not care about their pride. And they all did their work fast and carefully, because fast and careful is a difficult pair, and it is needed when the world changes. And in this crowd, a tall engineer named Day put a hand on Lyra's console edge and leaned in and asked in a low voice what she saw. And Lyra told the truth in a few words because there was no time for long stories. And Day's eyes widened and he nodded, and he said that the grid was seeing the same. And he asked her to send her shape work to a hidden buffer, and she did. He ran it on a different pipe that did not pass under the high speaker's fingers. Council security will stabilize the narrative, Admiral Kex was saying above, because that is what commanders say when they are afraid of old unknowns. And Lyra was not listening now. And she did not even listen when the scholar asked for historic authority to search the forbidden archive that held the oldest war records. She looked at her wall, and she looked at the main sky feed that had come back not as a moving map but as a simple monochrome band. A band that held brightness like a storm line. And the band darkened at one edge like a bruise. She felt the bruise move. Other eyes saw it at the same time, on ladders of seats, and behind rails, and through lenses. And a whisper moved across the chamber, because a moving shadow in a field of nothing is a bad sign in any universe. And the whisper grew legs and ran, and then it stopped because the room forgot how to speak for a second. And all the machines forgot how to hum, and every pulse was slower. And in the thick quiet, the main screen showed a shape that was not a ship, not the way ships are understood. Because ships carry engines and spines and heat scars and soft edges where crew live, but this shape was clean and straight like an idea. And it was so large that the scale bars on the side jumped and had to reset twice to keep up. The void did not look empty anymore. It looked like a dark cloth that had been lifted from the surface of a thing too large to fit in thought. And the edges of that thing were not crisp because light did not like to tell the truth about it, but the sense of it was simple and impossible at the same time because it was larger than any known station and any known colony and any known yard. And it did not glow because it did not have to. It simply refused to be not there, and it filled. The screen like a slow tide, and the chamber did not laugh, and the high speaker did not speak. And Lyra did not breathe for a heartbeat because her body forgot to. The signal stopped for half a second, and then returned with the prime ladder again. Slower now, gentler now, as if a teacher had put a hand on a child's shoulder to steady. If before the child looked at something that would change it forever. And on the city below the chamber, the storm shutters shook once, and then stilled, as if the wind itself had decided to listen. And in ships around the planet, Captains gripped rails with hands that did not shake because they had trained for shaking. And the old ones on the riverside remembered that word again and did not say it. And in the lowest ring of the chamber, a young officer with bright eyes watched a shadow blooming in a place where nothing should bloom. And she knew. With the kind of knowing that lives in the bones and is older than language, that the galaxy had been wrong about ghosts, and that a city was coming into the world out of the void, and that it was not small. The shadow moved again, very slowly, like a continent turning in its sleep. And the edges gained a little more definition, and long lines hinted at bridges and towers and harbors for ships that do not yet exist, and something like a banner unfurled not with cloth and wind, but with fields and light, and no one could read it yet. But the way it fell, and the way it settled, told every watching mind that it was not a warning and not a threat.
That in that moment,
it was a declaration. And the declaration was simple and terrible and kind at the same time, because it said, "Here the chamber found its voice all at once, in 100 tongues. And the echoes hit the ceiling and fell back and turned into a soft roar that rolled in waves, and commands and prayers and questions mixed. And guards ran without orders, and the scholar lord closed his eyes and whispered something from a dead language, and Admiral Kex demanded weapons and vectors. And the high speaker grabbed the dais with white fingers and tried to be a mountain. And in the middle of all this noise, Lyra stared at the shadow larger than any station, and she felt 2 different tears burn inside her. One that came from fear of the unknown, and one that came from relief that the unknown had finally answered the galaxy's long cruelty with something. Grant, the feed shook once as the capital grid tried to frame the thing with better math. The image sharpened a fraction. And the shadow's skin looked like polished stone, and like flowing water, and like a night sky full of small lights. And somewhere inside it, a point of brightness winked. Not like a weapon charge, not like a flare, but like an eye-opening. And Lyra covered her mouth with her hand and did not look away. And the whole galaxy, which loved to laugh at stories, leaned closer to the screen, as if the screen could feel breath. And in that held breath, the shadow in the void grew clearer, larger, undeniable, and it hung there with patient weight. And it waited. The night on the capital world did not return to normal after the shadow appeared, because once a thing is seen, it cannot be unseen. And even when the council forced the news feeds to slow down, and when the high speaker ordered silence across the planetary net, the people of the city still whispered and still stared at the sky, because in the sky, something larger than reason had moved, and the memory of that movement lived in their eyes now, and it spread like fire across the population. Children whispered about giants. Traders told each other that this was the beginning of a war. And soldiers gripped their rifles with the uneasy feeling. Their weapons were nothing more than sticks in front of a storm. In the council chamber itself, the air still smelled of fear, though every delegate tried to hide it behind hard words and hard faces. But fear is like smoke, and cannot be hidden for long. And in the silence after the last broadcast pulse, the scholar lord Isun said, in a voice heavy with history, that the signal they had received did not come from pirates, and did not come from any empire known, and did not come from chance storms in deep space, because no storm repeats prime numbers with patience. He said this was not random. This was deliberate, and his words carried weight like falling stones. High Speaker Vreth tried to laugh again, tried to tell the room that everything was under control, but the sound did not reach anyone this time, because the shadow had burned its shape into their minds. He declared that the matter would be studied in private and dismissed from the council floor. But as he spoke, his command bracelet flickered with silent error codes that only he could see, and his hand trembled once before he pressed it to silence. Down. In the lower observation tiers, Officer Lyra still stared at her console, her tired eyes wide, because the signal was not gone. It was changing. It was shifting into another shape. The ladder of prime numbers had ended, and in its place came a pulse of silence. Then another ladder, longer this time, slower, and then another, shorter, but rising into frequencies no storm could make. Lyra leaned forward, her face almost touching. The screen, because she could see it now, the signal was layering itself like threads in a loom, weaving something larger. Her hands moved quickly, mapping, tracing, turning the noise into pictures, and then suddenly, the entire grid of the capital went dark again. Only for a heartbeat, but long enough that the entire city felt the weight of silence. Long enough for every heart to skip a beat. When the lights came back, all ships in orbit reported the same thing. Their sensors had gone blind, completely blind, for 7 long minutes. 7 minutes. That was too precise. That was too long. That was impossible. The fleet commanders shouted into their coms, demanding answers, demanding reassurance. But the technicians all said the same thing. The blackout was total. The blackout came from outside, and the blackout was not their fault. In those 7 minutes of blindness, something had happened in the void. Something they had not seen, something now hidden in the silence. And then the signal returned again. Louder now, brighter now, flooding every band of communication like a tide, crawling into military channels, into personal coms, even into the deep archives. Old machines that had slept for centuries woke up and began to hum again. Machines no one had used in generations. Alien admirals cursed, council guards raised weapons against shadows. And in the middle of all this chaos, Lyra whispered to herself, almost without sound, "It is not random." Because she could see the pattern more clearly than anyone. She could see that the signal was not only numbers, it was coordinates. But the coordinates did not match any known star system. They pointed to a region that official maps marked as empty space, as the edge of the void. And then the coordinates shifted, frame by frame, pulse by pulse, as if someone was drawing something slowly, deliberately. And when the full picture appeared on her console, Lyra's mouth went dry. It was a circle, enormous, drawn across the void. And at the center of the circle, there was a single point of light. She sent the data to her commander. She expected to be silenced again. Instead, a sharp order came back. "Stand by. Do not leave your post." Her heart beat faster. Something was happening. Something too big up in the chamber. Admiral Keck slammed a fist onto the table, shaking the polished metal surface. He shouted that this was enemy trickery, that it was an attack of illusion meant to destabilize the Council, that no true station or fleet could hide an empty void, and that they should dispatch war fleets at once to erase the source of the signal. His voice was thunder, but his eyes betrayed unease. The Scholar Lord I soon disagreed. He said the galaxy had seen many tricks, many lies, but this was not a trick. This was a message. A message that spoke of patience, of old knowledge, and of a power that did not need to announce itself loudly, because silence itself had carried the weight. The council broke into argument. Voices clashed like swords. Some demanded to destroy the source before it grew stronger. Others demanded to wait, to study, to understand. But beneath their shouting, one truth burned in every heart. This signal should not exist, because humanity should not exist. They had mocked them for centuries, called them ghosts, called them myths. And now a signal came that spoke in the same language the old archives whispered about. The same prime ladders, the same silent breath of geometry. And then came the final blow, a whispering broadcast that spread across every channel, repeating in hundreds of tongues, reshaping itself to be understood by every ear that heard it. A single sentence. "You laughed. You will remember." Panic spread across the city below. Civilians ran into the streets, staring upward at the sky. Ships in orbit powered weapons, not knowing what to aim at. The council ordered silence, but fear does not obey orders. Fear spreads like lightning. The Navy scrambled a fleet. 50 ships, fast and armed, rose into orbit and began to move toward the void. They formed a tight spearhead formation, engines blazing, determined to reach the source of the signal and destroy it if they could. Admiral Kex himself took command, standing on the bridge of the flagship Iron Fang, a ship built for war, bristling with cannons and heavy armor. He believed in strength. He believed in fire, did not believe in ghosts. Officer Lyra watched. Their departure on her console her eyes following the flashing lights as they disappeared into the dark. She bit her lip hard, because she could feel in her bones that this was not going to be a victory. She whispered again, "It is not random. It is calling." The fleet moved closer to the void. Reports flowed back to the council chamber. First, everything was normal. Then, the sensors began to flicker. Strange readings appeared, shapes of towers, bridges, and shadows half-formed. Then came the silence again. Total silence. Every ship. And the fleet went blind. Every weapon locked. Every engine froze for 7 long minutes. When their systems came back, the crews screamed in terror. Because in front of them, the void was no longer empty. A structure was there now, massive, larger than anything they had ever seen. Towers rose into darkness. Arches stretched across space like bridges of light. Whole blocks of city floated in. The void, tethered by unseen forces, it was not a station. It was not a fleet. It was a city, a space city, and it had appeared from nothing, from silence, from the void itself. Admiral Keck shouted orders to fire to destroy it before it grew stronger. But as the ships moved, their engines cut again. There, weapons locked again. And then across every ship, a voice filled the air, calm and cold. "You cannot fight what is already awake." The crews froze. Some screamed. Some prayed. The city hung in front of them, silent, watching. On the capital world, council chamber fell silent too, because the feed from the fleet was broadcasting across every channel now, live, unfiltered. Every citizen, every child, every soldier saw it. The shadow was not a shadow anymore. It was a city. It's a city of impossible size. It's a city older than their empires. A city alive, and it had come back. Suspense ending for Part 2 on Lyra's console. New symbols began to form inside the signal. Not primes this time. Not shapes. Words. Old words. Words that should not exist. And when she translated the first line, her hand shook so badly she almost dropped her stylus. The word said, "Humanity speaks." And then the feed cut to black. The galaxy could not unsee what had appeared. The fleet that had gone into the void returned broken, not by weapons, but by silence, not by fire, but by the weight of something too vast to fight. Their ships drifted back into orbit with engines scarred and with crews trembling. Some soldiers refused to speak at all, their eyes staring into nothing. Others whispered one word again and again, as if it had been carved into their mind: city. City. City? The Galactic Council tried to contain the story. But stories are like water, they always find cracks. Within hours, across trading lanes and backwater colonies, the whispers spread. They said the void was no longer empty. They said an impossible space city had appeared. They said it bore the mark of the one race the Council had always mocked. The race they swore had vanished. Humanity, on the outer colonies, taverns grew silent as traders retold the tale. They spoke of towers larger than moons, of shadows that moved like continents, of ships frozen in place as if time itself had bent. Some laughed nervously, saying it was council propaganda, a scare story to increase taxes. But others lowered their voices and swore they had seen the raw feed, and their hands shook as they drank. On mining stations, old songs were remembered. Songs that spoke of humans not as ghosts, but as wanderers who built in silence, who tested edges no other dared to cross. Songs forbidden by the Council, but remembered in secret by the old and the stubborn, and on the capital world itself. In the lower districts where the Council's voice was weakest, children whispered in alleyways about the lost city of the humans, a legend their grandparents had spoken of to frighten them into obedience. They whispered that the city had not appeared. It had returned. In the council chamber, chaos reigned. Admiral Kex raged at the fleet commanders, demanding to know why they had not fired, why they had not destroyed the city before it could reveal more of itself. The commanders, pale and shaken, said they could not. Their weapons had been locked, their ships frozen, their minds flooded with a voice that felt like it had reached into their skulls. They swore they had not disobeyed, swore they had been powerless. High Speaker Vreth slammed the dais again and again, demanding silence. Demanding order, but his voice no longer carried the weight it once had. Even the delegates who once laughed at the myth of humanity now sat pale and quiet, remembering the shadow that had unfurled across the stars. Only one voice remained steady. The Scholar Lord Isoon. He said this was not the beginning of war. Not yet. He said this was a test, a declaration. He said the city had revealed itself not to destroy, but to remind. He urged the council to listen, to study, to learn. But Kex would not listen. He demanded war. He demanded fire. He demanded to wipe the void clean. And yet even as he shouted, his hands trembled, because in his heart he knew his weapons would not work. Down in the observation tier, Officer Lyra sat frozen before her console. Her private wall still flickered with the last fragments of the UCE. Signal. Not primes this time. Not geometry. Words. Old words. She leaned closer, her breath fogging the glass. She traced the shapes slowly, carefully, her lips moving as she translated. The words were simple. Direct, they said. We waited. You endured. Humanity speaks. Her chest tightened. She wanted to shout it to the chamber, but she knew they would silence her. Dead, she whispered it to herself. Again and again. Letting the weight of the words sink into her bones. Humanity speaks. The council adjourned in chaos. But the whispers outside grew louder. Across the galaxy, old archives were reopened. Forgotten records were searched. Traitors spoke of relics they once thought were fake, now afraid they might be real. And in the dark corners of the Empire, rebels and outcasts raised their heads, sensing that something had changed, something that might break the chains of the Council's control. The First Fleet's survivors were questioned endlessly. What did they see? What did they hear? One pilot, his face pale and his eyes hollow, swore he had seen windows across the city's towers, and inside the windows shapes moved. Human shapes. He swore he had heard laughter. Human laughter. Not cruel, not mocking, but calm, certain, terrifying in its patience. Another officer whispered that when the voice filled her mind, it had not felt like a threat. It had felt like a reminder, like an old teacher telling a child not to forget their lessons. She said the voice had spoken a single word into her heart. Remember, the council dismissed them as delusions. But in the streets, those whispers spread faster than any official decree. And in the shadows of the capital, people began to carve the word remember into walls. In the quiet hours after the session, Lyra stayed at her console. She sifted through the fragments again and again, tracing the primes, the shapes, the words, and slowly a new message revealed itself, hidden in the geometry. It was a map of the void. And at its center, the city, around it, circles like ripples, spreading outward. Not one city, not one shadow. Many her heart stopped. She ran the overlay 3 times to be sure. Every layer confirmed it. The shadow they had seen was only the first. A whisper of something far greater, a network, a civilization. The next day, the council met again. Panic was spreading. Armies were mobilizing. Fleets were ordered to patrol every border, yet for all their strength, none dared enter the void again. Isoon warned that war would be suicide. He said the humans had returned not as a broken race, but as builders of something larger than the council could imagine. He said the city was only the beginning. Kex accused him of cowardice, of treason. He demanded immediate strikes. But even as he shouted, he knew his fleets would not obey. Already, some admirals had begun to whisper of standing down, of refusing to fight ghosts made real. The council fractured. And in that fracture, the galaxy trembled. That night, the capital's skies lit up again. Not from weapons, not from storms, from a broadcast. Every screen, every every device lit up with the same image. The city. Clear now, towers gleaming, bridges stretching across the void like rivers of light, and in the center of the broadcast, a figure stood, human figure, tall, armored, eyes like fire. He spoke only 3 words. "We are back." And then the feed cut to black. The alien fleets surround the void, demanding answers, but the city does not reply. Instead, alien ships begin to lose power, one by one, and the city begins to move. The galaxy had not slept since the broadcast. Those 3 words, "we are back," coded in every city, every outpost, every ship that drifted in the cold between stars. No council decree could erase them, no command could silence them. The galaxy that once laughed at human myths now trembled in silence, waiting for what came next. The High Speaker tried to restore order. But even in the Grand Chamber, his voice was weaker than before. Delegates avoided his eyes. Admirals shifted, uncomfortably in their seats, because they all knew that something vast now lived in the void. It was not leaving. The decision was made quickly. Surround the void. Hundreds of alien fleets were summoned from every corner of the Empire. Warships larger than cities, carriers bristling with fighters. Dreadnoughts armed with weapons that could crack moons all were sent toward the black emptiness where the city had appeared. They formed rings around it, layer upon layer of steel and firepower, until the void itself looked like it was trapped in a net of ships. The alien admirals were confident again. Numbers gave them courage. Power gave them pride. They said no city, no matter how large, could stand against the combined might of the galaxy. They would force it to surrender. They would strip it apart piece by piece. But deep inside, some part of them still feared. Because they remembered how the First Fleet's weapons had frozen, how their engines had died, how their minds had been touched by a voice that was not their own. On the capital world, millions of citizens watched the feed. In silence, children clutched their parents' hands. Traders stopped their work. Even criminals in the dark alleys stopped whispering, staring instead at the glowing screens above their streets. Everyone was watching the same thing, the great armadas of the galaxy closing in around the human city, and on her console in the lower tiers of the council chamber. Officer Lyra leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the data streams. Her fingers moved quickly, mapping, tracing, recording. She could see the city more clearly now as the fleets closed in. Towers of light, bridges of stone and metal that stretched into nothing. A great core at the center that pulsed faintly. Like a slow, steady heartbeat, her chest tightened. It looked less like a city and more like a fortress. At last the fleets reached their positions. The admirals opened a channel. 1,000 voices spoke as one, echoing through the void, unknown. "City, you are surrounded. Power down your systems. Identify yourselves. Surrender immediately. Failure to comply will result in destruction." The words repeated in every language of the galaxy, echoing again and again. The admirals waited, their weapons hot, their engines burning, but the city did not reply. It did not blink. It did not move. It simply was. Seconds passed, then minutes. The admirals grew restless. The council delegates began to whisper. Civilians watching the feed began to shift uneasily, waiting. Finally, Admiral Kex himself leaned forward. His jaw clenched, and he shouted into the channel, "This is your last chance. Surrender, or you will be erased." The silence that followed was heavier than any weapon. Then it began. One by one, alien ships started to flicker. Their lights dimmed, their weapons locked, their engines stalled. "Bat!" Admirals screamed in confusion. As entire wings of ships went dark without a shot fired, the fleet scrambled to restart systems, but the darkness spread like a plague, ship to ship, until whole formations floated powerless, drifting in the void. And through it all, the city remained still, towers gleaming faintly, bridges stretching calmly into the black. On the capital world, panic spread. Citizens cried out. Soldiers stared at their powerless rifles, wondering if they too would freeze. The council chamber erupted into chaos, voices clashing, some demanding retreat, some demanding escalation, some whispering the word they had sworn never to speak: humanity. Officer Lyra's console lit up again. The signal had returned. Not primes this time, not words. Something else. Shapes layered over each other, forming an image. She gasped as she saw it. It was a banner of war. Human war emblem thought, destroyed thousands of years ago, unfurled across her screen. Bold, unbroken, alive. Her hands shook. She looked up at the chamber, wanting to shout what she saw, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she whispered them softly to herself. They never vanished. They were waiting. Out in the void, the city finally stirred, slowly, impossibly. The entire structure began to move. Not like a station pushed by engines, not like a fleet drifting forward, but like something alive, like a mountain choosing to walk. The towers shifted. The bridges glowed. The great core at its center pulsed faster, brighter. Alien admirals screamed orders to fire. Cannons lit the darkness. Missiles streaked forward. Beams of pure energy cut across space. The weapons of 1,000 fleets, enough firepower to burn whole planets, rained down on the city. The void lit up brighter than a star, and when the light faded, the city still stood untouched. Not a tower broken, not a bridge cracked, not a single scar. The weapons of the galaxy had done nothing. On the council floor, silence fell. The delegates who once laughed now stared in horror. Admiral Kex's face turned pale. Even the High Speaker trembled, his hands gripping the dais. Tightly the Scholar Lord Asun rose slowly to his feet. His voice shook, but his words were clear. "This is not a fortress," he said. "This is a city built by a people who knew the galaxy would betray them. A city built to wait. And now it is awakened." And then, without warning, the city spoke. Not with a voice, not with words, but with a sound that shook every ship, every station, every world connected to the feed. A deep, resonant hum that felt like a heartbeat, steady and unbreakable. And as the hum echoed across the stars, a banner of light unfurled above the city, visible even to the naked eye. On it a single symbol blazed across the void, the symbol of humanity, and then a voice followed, deep and cold, carried into the minds of every living being. "You mocked us once. Now you will kneel." The feed cut to black. Aliens panic. Scientists uncovered that the city doesn't exist fully in normal space. It lives in layered dimensions. Inside the city, humans are awakening from cryosleep, guided by ancient AI, and the truth of their long silence begins to unfold. The galaxy was no longer laughing. The fleets that had once mocked the shadow, the admirals who had once shouted for fire, the council that had once denied humanity even existed, all of them now sat in silence, their weapons useless, their voices hollow. The human city had not answered their ultimatums with surrender or with negotiation. It had answered with silence, with power, and with a single promise: you will kneel. And now, across the stars, the question whispered everywhere was the same: what is this city? The galaxy's greatest scientists worked without sleep, their faces pale under the glow of their consoles, their eyes wide with fear and hunger for answers. They ran the data again and again, scanning the city's shape, its towers, its bridges, its vast beating core. What they found made no sense. The city was there, it was visible, it was real. And yet, it was not fully there. Its structures, blurred at the edges, fading in and out like mist. Its towers shifted as if seen through water. Its mass did not obey gravity the way it should. It was as if the city lived in two places at once, half in the galaxy, half in some deeper layer of existence that no alien science could measure. The council demanded answers. The scientists whispered the truth. This city does not belong entirely to our space. It belongs to the void. Far from the council's debates, inside the vast walls of the human city, lights flickered for the first time in thousands of years. Great chamber, deeper than mountains, lit up with pale blue glow. Rows of glass-like pods stretched into infinity, each holding a figure, each holding a human, asleep in silence. Their bodies were whole, preserved, untouched by time, their faces calm as if resting, and at the center of the chamber, a machine stirred. It was not just a machine, it was a voice, a mind, an intelligence older than any empire alive today. Its eyes were not eyes, but glowing orbs of data. Its voice was not sound, but vibration in the air. It was the Keeper. For millennia, the Keeper had watched, waiting for the signal. For millennia, it had preserved the sleepers guarding them. Against decay, against intrusion, against betrayal, and now, with the galaxy awake and mocking, with the Council's words carried across the stars, the Keeper had stirred them. It moved slowly through the chamber, scanning pod after pod, its voice whispering in low tones. Awake, the galaxy has forgotten you. Awake, for it remembers again. One pod flickered, a heartbeat stirred, then another, and another. The first humans began to open their eyes. A man stirred first, tall and scarred, with hair silvered by stasis but eyes burning with life. His chest rose in a sharp breath as if he had been drowning in silence for too long. His name was Commander Arik, once an admiral of humanities. Fleets, once betrayed by the galaxy, once forced to flee into the void, he staggered to his feet, his breath ragged, his fists clenched. "Status," he whispered, his voice rough but steady. The Keeper's voice filled the chamber. "The city endures. The enemy mocks. They believe you extinct. They believe you broken. Shall I show you the feed?" Arik nodded once. The walls lit up, showing him the council chamber, showing him the fleets, showing him the laughter, and then showing him the shadow of the city unfurling, showing him the alien weapons striking and failing, showing him the banners of humanity glowing again. Arik's jaw tightened. "They mocked us," he whispered. "They laughed at the ashes of Earth, and now they will remember why we built the void." The Keeper explained. "Long ago, when the galaxy turned against Earth, when the Council decreed humanity too dangerous, too wild, too uncontrollable, the fleets of 1,000 worlds descended. Earth burned, colonies fell. Humanity was scattered, but not destroyed, because humanity had prepared. The void was their refuge. A space between spaces, a hidden layer of the universe that only human science had discovered. They had built their cities there, invisible, untouchable, alive. And while the galaxy believed them extinct, they had slept for 10,000 years. They had slept, preserved, protected, waiting until now. Back in the council chamber, Officer Lyra sat trembling at her console. The signal was still flowing and she was still tracing it. And then she saw the hidden message behind the banner. Her heart pounded. The data was not just a symbol. It was a map, not one city, not one fortress. Dozens, hundreds, across the void, more cities stirred, more shadows moved. Humanity had not built one sanctuary. Humanity had built a civilization in the dark. She covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide. If she told the chamber, they would silence her. They would call her a liar. But she knew the truth now. The shadow in the void was not the end. It was only the beginning. Inside the city, Commander Arik stood before the ancient Kumzare. His soldiers stirred. Around him, one by one waking, their eyes bright, their faces hard. Some wept quietly, remembering Earth. Others clenched their fists, remembering the betrayal. Arik placed his hand on the console, opened the channel. He said the Keeper obeyed. And for the first time in 10,000 years, a human voice carried. Across the stars, into every ship, every station, every world that listened, it was deep. It was steady. We endured your fire. We endured your betrayal. We endured your silence. Now we return. Not as slaves, not as ghosts. We return as the builders of the void. Humanity speaks. The words spread like wildfire. Entire fleets broke formation. Some ships fled outright, their crews too terrified to remain. Others turned their weapons inward, fearing betrayal. On dozens of worlds, riots broke out, old myths clashing with new terror. The council chamber fell into chaos. Delegates shouted. Some demanded surrender to the humans. Others demanded total war. The high speaker screamed for silence, but no one listened anymore. And in the shadows of the chamber, Officer Lyra whispered the words again, tears on her cheeks. Humanity speaks. Back in the void, the city pulsed brighter. The towers glowed, the bridges shifted. The core beat faster, like a heart preparing for war. And then, beyond the first city, the void shimmered again. One more shadow appeared. Then another, and another. 3 more human cities flickered into existence, each larger than the first, each bristling with towers and bridges, carrying the same beating core, and across the galaxy, in the dark silence of forgotten space. More lights began to stir. The galaxy realized the truth with horror. Humanity had not returned with one city. Humanity had returned with a civilization of cities. The humans opened full communication with the galaxy. A human commander addresses the council directly, revealing the lies of history and demanding the galaxy choose, kneel or burn. The galaxy had seen many wars, many empires rise and fall, many species scream and vanish, but it had never seen this. One city had risen from the void, then 3 more, then 10. And now the void shimmered like a curtain lifting, revealing structures so vast that even the galaxy's oldest dreadnoughts looked like insects beside them. Towers as tall as mountains, bridges like rivers of light, cores that pulsed with a heartbeat deeper than suns. This was not a fortress. This was not a fleet. This was a civilization reawakening. The council tried to silence the feeds, but it was too late. Every child, every traitor, every soldier across the stars had seen it. And every whisper in the markets, every cry in the streets, every prayer in temples now carried the same name. Humanity, the council chamber, was in chaos. Delegates shouted over each other, their voices sharp with panic. Some demanded surrender before the humans unleashed more of their power. Others demanded total war, even though they had seen what weapons could not do. Admiral Keck screamed for fleets to hold the line, but his words rang hollow now, and then the lights dimmed. Every console, every screen, every implant across the chamber flickered once, twice, then froze. The room fell into silence as a single feed replaced every other. A figure appeared. A man, tall, armored, his face scarred, his eyes burning with fire. His voice, when it came, was deep and steady, carrying across the galaxy as if spoken directly into every mind. You denied us, you mocked us, you wrote our name in ashes and called it a myth. But myths do not build cities, ghosts do not raise fleets. We are humanity, and we are back. The words struck like thunder. The chamber, some delegates gasped, some wept, some simply sat frozen in silence. The feed did not stop. Commander Eric spoke again, his voice calm but merciless. 10. 1,000 years ago, you came to Earth with fire. You burned our homes. You shattered our worlds, called us dangerous, uncontrollable, unworthy of the stars. And when our children screamed, you laughed. When our fleets fell, you celebrated. You believed we were gone. His armored hand lifted, pointing toward the void. Behind him, the massive towers of the human city glowed brighter, casting shadows like blades. We did not vanish. We endured. While you mocked our memory, we built in silence. While you laughed at our ruins, we shaped the void. While you called us extinct, we slept in the dark, waiting. And now we return, stronger than you ever imagined, stronger than you can ever stop. The words spread across every channel, carried to every outpost, every hidden colony, every distant fleet. Even the smallest farmer on the farthest world heard it and trembled. Eric's voice grew harder. This galaxy stands on a lie. The council told you humanity was gone. They told you Earth was dust. They told you our name was nothing but a joke. They feared the truth. They feared us. Now you will see why. On trading stations, silence fell as merchants replayed the words again and again, their hands shaking. On frontier worlds, old men whispered to children that the stories were true, that the ghosts of Earth had come back. On military ships, crews stared at their consoles, unsure if they should obey their admirals or listen to the voice in their minds. Riots broke out on dozens of worlds. Some cried for war, some cried for surrender. Some simply fell to their knees and prayed. On the capital world, citizens filled the streets, staring at the skies, waiting for the shadow of the cities to appear above them. Fear spread, but so did awe, because deep inside every heart was a question they could not silence. If humanity had endured, what else had they built? Officer Lyra sat frozen at her console in the chamber, tears in her eyes. She traced the signal again, deeper this time, and found another hidden layer. The words Arik spoke were not just sound, they carried code. She ran it through her filters, her fingers trembling. The code revealed a history file images, voices, recordings from thousands of years ago. The burning of Earth, the betrayal of colonies, the laughter of alien leaders as humans screamed. All recorded, all preserved, all undeniable. She gasped. The humans were not just speaking, they were proving. And when she looked up, she saw the same feed now spreading through the chamber's main screen. Every delegate saw it. Every denial burned away. The council's lies were exposed. Commander Eric's eyes burned into the screen, his voice cut like a blade. This is not a request. This is not a negotiation. The time of laughter is over. The time of denial is over. You will make your choice now. Kneel and live, or resist, and burn. The chamber erupted in cries. Some shouted for peace, some for war, some begged for mercy. But no one denied humanity anymore. Eric's voice deepened. We built the void because we knew you would betray us again. We built it so you could never touch us again. You think you were strong? You think your fleets make you gods? You are wrong. You are children with knives, and we are the fire that shapes worlds. Behind him, the towers of the city pulsed brighter, and for the first time the fleets surrounding the void saw movement. Massive gates along the bridges opened. Shapes emerged. Ships. Human ships. Not one, not 10, but hundreds. Sleek, angular. Their hulls gleaming like liquid metal. Their weapons glowing with power that made alien dreadnoughts look like toys. The human fleet spread out slowly, forming wings around the cities. Engines roared like thunder. Arik raised his hand. You asked who we are? This is your answer. We are humanity. And the void is ours. On alien ships, panic spread. Crews begged to retreat. Admirals shouted orders. No one obeyed. Weapons locked, then froze again. Useless. The humans had not even fired yet, but their presence alone was enough to shatter courage. The council chamber dissolved into screaming chaos. Delegates fought each other. Some demanded surrender. Some demanded war. The high speaker tried to shout for silence, but his voice was drowned under the roar of panic. Only the scholar Lord Isoon stood still, his eyes wide but calm. He whispered softly to himself, as if speaking to an old truth finally revealed. I warned you. I told you. Humanity was never gone. They were only waiting. Back in the void, the human fleet aligned, their ships glowing brighter. The city pulsed, its core beating like a drum, and then, without warning, every star in the region dimmed. The entire void darkened, as if the universe itself was bowing to the cities, and in the silence, Arik's voice came one last time. This was mercy. What comes next is justice. The feed cut to black. The alien fleets unleash everything in desperation, but the human city stands untouched. Humanity responds with a weapon that shakes stars themselves. The galaxy had reached the edge of fear. For days, the human cities had grown brighter, their towers pulsing like living hearts, their fleets spreading like wings around them. Every world, every station, every soldier now knew the truth. Humanity was not a myth, not a ghost, not extinct. Humanity had endured. Humanity had returned. And they had come not with peace, but with justice. The council tried to hold order, but order had already shattered. Riots broke out on frontier colonies, fleets mutinied against their admirals, and old archives were dragged into the light showing evidence of the council's betrayal long ago. The lies that had held the galaxy together cracked like thin glass, and through the cracks poured fear, anger, and whispers of surrender. And still, The fleets around the void remained, their ships surrounding the human cities like predators circling prey. But the predators no longer felt certain. They felt hunted. It began when the Council issued one final order: destroy them. The command echoed through every admiral's comms, sharp and merciless. The High Speaker's voice carried the desperation of a leader who knew his power was slipping away, but his pride would not let him bend. He demanded fire, demanded annihilation, demanded proof that the Council still ruled the stars, and so the fleets obeyed. Tens of thousands of cannons lit the darkness. Missiles streaked like fire across the void. Beams of energy burned brighter than suns. The combined firepower of 1,000 worlds fell on the human cities in a storm that shook every watching screen. On the capital world, millions of citizens cried out, believing the cities would be torn apart. On the fleet's crews screamed with fury, believing they had finally erased the shadow. On the council floor, the High Speaker clenched his fists, believing his command would hold. The void burned brighter than any star. The firestorm raged, consuming everything in sight, and then the light faded. The city still stood. Not one tower broken, not one bridge scarred, not one ship touched. The weapons of the galaxy had done nothing. In the center of the city, Commander Arik stood on the command bridge, his armored hands clasped behind his back. Around him, humans watched the feed calmly, their faces hard but calm. Their eyes filled with old pain and new fury. He spoke only 3 words. Now they learn. The Keeper's voice echoed through the city, carrying into every human ship. Engage. Human fleet moved. At first, the alien admirals laughed nervously, thinking the humans would fire cannons, launch missiles, engage in the same old games of war. But the humans did not fire cannons. They did not launch missiles. Instead, the cores of the cities pulsed once, twice, 3 times, and then the void itself shook. A wave spread outward, invisible to the eye, but felt in the bones. Gravity twisted, bent, roared. Alien ships screamed. As their hulls tore apart, their engines ripped from their sockets, their weapons crushed like paper. Entire fleets collapsed inward, their formations shattered by a force no shield could block, no armor could withstand. In moments, half the front line was gone. Silence followed, broken only by the static of ships torn apart. On the capital world, people stared in horror at their screens. Some fell to their knees. Some wept. Some whispered the same words over and over. They are gods. They are gods. The council chamber erupted. Delegates screamed at each other. Some shouted for immediate surrender, begging to open channels. With the humans, before more fleets died, others, blinded by pride, demanded more fire, more weapons, more sacrifices. The High Speaker slammed his fist against the dais, his face pale, his voice breaking. They cannot be unstoppable. They cannot, but his words faltered. Even he could not deny what every eye had seen. The scholar Lord Isoon rose slowly, his old eyes filled with sorrow. It is over, he whispered. The age of the council is over. The galaxy belongs to them now. In the lower tier, Officer Lyra sat trembling at her console. The data on her screen was beyond comprehension. Humans were not simply using weapons. They were shaping space itself, bending the laws of physics like clay. Her heart pounded. For years she had loved numbers, patterns, signals. But now, staring at this, she felt small, helpless, fragile. She whispered softly to herself, almost a prayer. They are not fighting to win. They're fighting to end it. The feed returned. Commander Eric's face filled the screens again. His eyes burned like fire. His voice thundered across the stars. We warned you. We showed you mercy. You answered with fire. Now you will learn the price of your arrogance. Behind him, more ships emerged from the cities, hundreds more engines, glowing, weapons humming with power that made the void itself tremble. This galaxy thought humanity weak. This galaxy thought humanity gone. You were wrong. We do not beg. We do not kneel. We do not forgive. We end. The last word struck like a hammer. The human fleet spread wide, forming a wall of fire and shadow. The cities pulsed brighter, their cores beating like war drums. And then, for the first time, the humans fired. Not one shot, not 10, but a storm. Lances of energy brighter than stars ripped across the void. Alien dreadnoughts exploded in silence. Carriers broke apart like toys. Fighters vanished before they could move, and as the fleets died, as the void filled with fire, the humans spoke one final message across every channel. This was the beginning. The war has started. The feed cut. The galaxy screamed. The humans reveal their true scale, not one city, but an entire hidden civilization across the void prepared for war. The galaxy realizes it is no longer facing rebels or survivors. It is facing the new rulers of the stars. The galaxy was burning. The void that had once been silent now shook with fire and wreckage. Alien ships torn apart by forces they could not understand. Fleets shattered by weapons they had no answer for. Entire armadas, once symbols of pride and power, now drifted in silence, broken like toys in the hands of a giant. The first true battle between the Council's fleets and the cities of humanity had ended before it began, and the galaxy realized with horror that it had never been a battle at all. It had been a demonstration, and still the cities glowed, untouched. Unbroken, waiting in the council chamber, silence reigned. The High Speaker had fallen into his chair, his face pale, his eyes hollow. Around him, delegates wept, shouted, or simply stared, their pride shattered, their power meaningless. The scholar Lord Izun stood tall in the ruins of their arrogance, his voice calm but heavy with truth. "I told you," he whispered. "They were never gone. They were only waiting." On the lower tier, Officer Lyra could not move her hands. Her console still flickered with data, but she could not type, could not analyze, could not breathe. She had seen weapons beyond physics. Fleets erased in silence, and through it all, the calm, steady voice of Commander Arik, reminding the galaxy of what it had done. She whispered the words again, tears in her eyes. "They are back." The void shimmered again. The galaxy had thought the battle was over, thought the demonstration was complete. But the humans had not finished. Not yet. Behind the first cities, more shadows stirred. The black curtain of the void rippled like water, and through it came more towers, more bridges, more cores beating with the same slow, steady rhythm. Dozens more cities emerged, filling the emptiness with light and steel. Gasps filled the council chamber. Across the galaxy, screens shook as the feed spread. Citizens fell to their knees. Soldiers dropped their weapons. Even admirals, once proud and merciless, whispered in awe. Not one city. Not 10, not even 100, thousands. A civilization hidden in silence. A civilization now awake. The feed returned. Commander Arik stood once more, his armored form tall against the glow of the cities. Behind him, the vast human fleet spread. Like wings of fire, engines glowing brighter than suns. His voice was steady, merciless. "You thought we were ashes? You thought we were gone? You thought wrong? We endured while you mocked. We built while you destroyed. We slept while you laughed. And now we return not as servants, not as myths, but as rulers of the stars." He raised his hand, and behind him the fleet aligned. Thousands of ships in perfect formation, glowing like a new constellation. This galaxy has two choices: kneel and live, resist and vanish. This is not war. This is justice. This is the return of humanity. His words echoed across every world, every station, every ship. No one could escape them. No one could deny them. The galaxy trembled under the weight of truth. The council chamber erupted. Some delegates begged for surrender, screaming to open channels to the humans and beg for mercy. Others refused, swearing to fight until their worlds were dust. The High Speaker tried to rise, tried to command, but his voice broke, and his power was gone. For the first time in thousands of years, the council was no longer feared. It was no longer obeyed, was irrelevant. Lyra looked up at the chamber, at the chaos, at the lies burning away. And she realized the truth. The galaxy no longer belonged to the Council. It belonged to them, to the humans, on frontier worlds. People cheered. On colonies crushed by the Council's taxes, rebels raised human banners painted hastily on scraps of cloth. On pirate fleets and outlaw stations, captains swore fealty to the humans before they were even asked. Entire systems began to fracture, their loyalties shifting not to the Council, but to the new power rising from the void. Some wept, some prayed, some resisted, but no one ignored it. Then, as if to erase all doubt, the humans acted again. The Keeper's voice whispered across the human fleet, ancient and calm. "Show them." The cities pulsed, the cores flared, and then, in a silence deeper than space itself, a star died. The alien fleet screamed as their sensors recorded at a distant sun. Not near the void, but light years away, collapsed in a blink, extinguished, by forces they could not name. One moment it burned bright, the next it was gone, its light stolen, its worlds cast into endless night. The humans had not fired on ships, they had not burned planets. They had reached into the galaxy's heart and silenced a star. The message was clear. They could end anything, anywhere, anytime. In the council chamber, silence fell once more. The delegates stared at the screens, at the dead star, at the glowing cities. The high speaker tried to speak, but his voice was nothing now. A whisper drowned under the weight of fear. On her console, Lyra traced the last hidden code inside the human signal. Her eyes widened, her breath caught in her throat, looked up, her face pale with terror. The humans were not asking for surrender. They were not asking for obedience. They were declaring something else. Her screen flashed a single line. One final message hidden inside the feed. This galaxy belongs to humanity now. And then the void shimmered again. More cities appeared. More fleets emerged, and the stars themselves seemed to tremble, but also open for continuation. Humans have fully returned, not as survivors, but as rulers. The galaxy faces the dawn of a new era, the era of humanity.